I wish someone had warned me, not because I would have walked away, but because I would have walked in with my eyes open. Everyone talks about how hard it is to make it to the WNBA, the long nights, the training, the pressure, the competition. I was ready for that. I had prepared my entire life to compete at the highest level. I believe that if you worked hard enough, if you stayed disciplined, if you respected the game, basketball would always meet you halfway. That belief had carried me through every level before this. So when I finally stepped into the WNBA, I thought the hardest part was behind me. I thought the rest would be about execution, about learning systems, about adjusting to speed. But almost immediately, I realized I had underestimated something far more difficult. It wasn't the game that shocked me, it was the environment around it. In my first days, everything felt surreal. New jersey, new locker room, new faces. The players I had watched from a distance were suddenly my teammates and opponents. I remember walking into the gym thinking, this is it. This is where everything finally makes sense. And for a moment, it did. The pace was faster, the margin for error smaller, but it was still basketball. Something I understood, something I trusted. But then there were the moments in between. The moments that didn't come with whistles or plays or film sessions. The pauses, the quiet, the lack of feedback. I would leave practice feeling unsure, not because I played badly, but because I didn't know how my performance was being read. At first, I told myself I was overthinking, that this was just part of being new. But the feeling didn't go away. It followed me into games, into meetings, into my own thoughts. There were times when I played solid minutes, made smart decisions, did exactly what was asked of me, and still walked away feeling invisible, not ignored, not disrespected, just unseen. And that feeling was unfamiliar. Basketball had always been clear to me. You played well, you felt it. You struggled, you fixed it here. Sometimes nothing happened, no reaction, no signal, just silence. That silence started to feel heavier than any defender I'd ever faced. I began to notice how different that silence felt depending on who you were, how some players seemed comfortable inside it, while others, especially newcomers, felt unsettled by it. Veterans moved with a calm I didn't yet have. They didn't search for reassurance. They didn't rush to prove anything. They trusted something I was still trying to earn. And slowly, I started to understand that this league doesn't always challenge you by pushing you. Sometimes it challenges you by pulling everything away and seeing what you do when nothing is given. That realization was uncomfortable because it meant basketball alone wasn't enough. It meant preparation had to be deeper than skill. It meant confidence couldn't depend on applause or feedback. It meant learning how to exist in uncertainty without letting it change who you are. And nobody prepares you for that part. Nobody tells you that sometimes the hardest opponent you face isn't on the court. It's the quiet question in your head asking where you stand. That was the moment I understood something important. The WNBA doesn't just test how well you play. It tests how you handle not knowing, how you carry yourself when answers don't come, how steady you remain when the game goes silent around you. And once that realization hit, I knew my rookie season wasn't just going to be about basketball. It was going to be about learning how to survive uncertainty without losing myself in it. That understanding didn't make things easier. In fact, it made everything heavier, because now I knew the silence wasn't accidental, it was intentional. And once you realize that, you start noticing how differently the same moments are treated depending on who's involved. I remember one of my early games where I stayed within the system, made the extra pass, defended hard, didn't try to force anything from the outside. It looked like a solid night. From the inside, it felt unfinished. Not because I wanted praise, but because I wanted clarity, and clarity never came. After the game, conversations moved on quickly. Film sessions focused elsewhere. No direct feedback, positive or negative, just the same quiet observation. That's when the doubt started creeping in, not about my ability, but about my position. I began asking myself questions I had never needed to ask before. Was I doing too little or too much? Was I being safe or invisible? Was I expected to take more risks or fewer? And the hardest part was realizing that no one was going to answer those questions for me. I noticed how veterans can make a similar mistake and it would disappear into the flow of the game. While for me, even small errors felt like they stayed in the air longer. Not because anyone said anything, but because I felt it. The way attention shifted, the way moments were remembered. And slowly it became clear that the league wasn't just evaluating my skills, it was evaluating my reactions, how I handled uncertainty, how I carried myself when nothing was explained, whether I stayed patient or started pressing, whether silence made me uncomfortable enough to change who I was. That realization was unsettling, because it meant the test wasn't something I could study for. There was no playbook for this part, No drill, no film session. It was about endurance, about whether I could stay mentally steady when feedback disappeared. And that's when I truly understood that the WNBA doesn't always challenge rookies by pushing them harder. Sometimes it challenges them by stepping back and watching who fills the space and who lets the silence get inside their head. By that point, the silence wasn't just something around me anymore. It had started living inside my head. Every practice, every game, every small interaction felt heavier than it should have. I wasn't struggling physically, but mentally I was constantly recalibrating, trying to read signals that were never clearly given. I became hyper aware of everything. My body language after a missed shot, the speed at which I got back on defense, the way I reacted when I wasn't involved in a play. I realized I wasn't just playing basketball anymore. I was performing composure, and that's exhausting. There were nights I went home replaying moments that didn't even show. Up on the stat sheet, wondering if they helped or hurt me, if they moved me forward or quietly set me back. I saw how easy it would be to start forcing things, to take shots I wouldn't normally take, to speak when silence might have been smarter, just to feel visible again. And that temptation scared me, because I knew once you start chasing attention, you stop playing your game. Veterans didn't do that. They trusted the work they had already put in. They understood that this league values predictability more than flashes. As a rookie, that kind of patience doesn't come naturally. You feel like time is limited, like every moment is a judgment, and that pressure creates a breaking point. I could feel myself approaching it. The question wasn't whether I could play at this level. The question was whether I could stay mentally intact when the environment offered no reassurance, whether I could hold on to my identity when the silence kept asking me to change. That was the moment I understood the real danger for rookies isn't failure, is losing yourself trying to survive the uncertainty. And I had to decide, right there, whether I was going to let that pressure shape me or slowly erase me. That was the moment I knew something had to change, not in how I played, but in how I processed everything around me. I realized I couldn't keep waiting for clarity to come from the outside, because in this league, clarity often arrives last. So I started building it for myself. I stopped chasing signs and started trusting habits. Preparation became my anchor in a way it never had before. I arrived earlier, not to be noticed, but to feel grounded. I focused on details that didn't depend on anyone else's reaction, defensive positioning, timing on cuts, making the simple play at the right moment. I stopped trying to prove that I belonged and started acting like I already did. That shift was uncomfortable at first because it meant letting go of the urge to be seen. But slowly, it brought peace. The mental noise quieted down. I wasn't replaying every moment anymore. I wasn't rushing to fix things that weren't broken. I trusted that consistency would matter more than explanation. And without anyone announcing it, things around me began to feel different. Instructions were clearer, but shorter. Corrections felt calmer. Responsibility increased in subtle ways that only someone inside the system would notice. It wasn't praise, and it wasn't the protection yet, but it was movement. I began to understand that the league wasn't trying to confuse me or hold me back. It was watching to see if I could remain myself when growth didn't come with reassurance, whether I could stay steady when recognition was delayed, and in learning to live inside that space, I felt myself becoming stronger, not because the pressure disappeared, but because it stopped controlling me. By then, everything finally started to make sense in a way it never had before. I realized that nobody warns you about this part of the journey because it can't be understood until you live through it. If someone had explained it to me earlier, I might have nodded and moved on, but I wouldn't have felt the weight behind it. The league wasn't trying to test my talent anymore. It was testing my stability. It was asking whether I could stay grounded without validation, whether my confidence came from preparation or from reaction, whether I could trust myself when the environment stayed quiet. And that realization changed how I measured progress. I stopped looking for immediate signs of approval and started paying attention to how solid I felt internally. I noticed that even on nights when the spotlight wasn't on me, my presence felt more settled. I wasn't rushing decisions. I wasn't second-guessing my instincts. I was playing within myself instead of playing to be noticed. That shift brought a different kind of confidence, one that didn't depend on applause or headlines. I understood that some players looked protected not because they were given special treatment, but because they had already survived years of this same silence, years of pressure that fans never see. Trust in this league isn't handed out when you arrive. It's built slowly, often painfully, through consistency and restraint. And once that truth landed, the frustration I had been carrying started to fade. I stopped comparing my path to anyone else's timeline. I stopped feeling like I was behind. I realized I was exactly where I needed to be. Being tested wasn't a sign that I didn't belong. It was a sign that the league was still watching closely. And attention, even when it's uncomfortable, is an opportunity. That understanding didn't make the journey easier, but it made it meaningful. It taught me patience in moments that once made me restless, and discipline in moments where doubt tried to creep in. Most importantly, it taught me that growth doesn't always feel like improvement while it's happening. Sometimes it feels like standing still, even when you're moving forward. Looking back now, I'm actually grateful nobody warned me about this part of the journey, because if they had, I might have tried to protect myself from it instead of growing through it. Some lessons aren't meant to be explained, they're meant to be experienced. The WNBA didn't strip anything away from me during those early moments. It added layers I didn't know I needed. It taught me how to stay steady when answers don't come, how to trust my work when reassurance is delayed, how to exist in uncertainty without letting it change who I am. That lesson goes far beyond basketball. It applies to any space where the stakes are high, where systems already exist, and where effort isn't immediately rewarded. Sometimes you're not being ignored, you're being observed. Sometimes silence isn't rejection, it's patience being tested. And once you learn to stand comfortably in that space, very little can shake you again. I stopped needing constant confirmation. I stopped waiting for permission to believe in myself. The pressure that once felt heavy became familiar, and familiarity turned it into strength. That's the part nobody prepares you for. Not the game, not the competition, but the quiet moments where you decide whether you'll stay true to yourself even when nothing around you tells you how. If you're watching this and you're in a phase of your own life where progress feels invisible and effort feels unacknowledged, understand this. Not being warned doesn't mean you're failing. Often, it means you're exactly where real growth begins. And if you want more honest, behind the scenes stories about the reality of professional basketball and the mental side no one talks about, subscribe and stay with me.